Great class, so today is May 13. Our learning targets today is to finish our conversation on the French Revolution by explaining the importance of a man named Robespierre and a time period during the French Revolution known as the Reign of Terror. Our plan for today, first there is a bell ringer question for you to answer. We will then be reviewing the Causes of the French Revolution worksheet you did a couple days ago. We will then talk about the importance of Robespierre and the Reign of Terror, and you will end class by doing some review over the French Revolution. I wasn't going to have you do a worksheet today, but out of gratitude for the work you've done to this point, well over 90% of you have continued to do work on time and overall have done a strong job with the quality of work. I decided not to give you that worksheet today, save you a little bit of extra work and time as my expression of gratitude for you. Just to let you know, there's going to be a quiz. It'll be posted tomorrow, but you will have tomorrow and Friday to complete it if necessary. It will be a quiz grade, the last quiz you have for this class. That will cover the American and French revolutions, and I'll talk more about that at the end of this video. So studying for that quiz, doing the bell ringer, that's the work that needs to get done before tomorrow. For the bell ringer, there is kind of a worksheet-esque type of activity for you to do. I'm going to post a worksheet, but it's actually responding to a question. I'm going to give you a couple different quotes from this time period, the Reign of Terror, and I want you to read the quotes and explain which one you agree with most and explain why. So part of your explanation needs to be explaining what the quote is really saying. So make sure your explanation also explains kind of the main message behind what that quote is all about. So do that first. What I'd like to do next is review the Causes of the French Revolution worksheet and go through some of the key details there. This will be part of your quiz explaining some of the causes of the French Revolution. So this would be good review for you to do. So each question was worth 1 point. We'll go through the first two. Pretty simple. For question number 1, we are reading, actually it's a secondary source, right? This is kind of like a textbook from 1938. It talks about how King Louis XVI, different than the 14th, not the Sun King, this is later, was absolute. And we talked about what this means earlier, how absolute means they have unlimited, complete power. And as usual, the divine right theory played a role as well. Second question asked, why might the people of France be angry with him? Well, we see several examples of this. But one, he appointed all of the officers. It's not democratic. He enforced all of the laws, so he's like the judge as well. He can declare war. He can make peace. He can levy taxes. He can spend other people's money as he sees fit. He controls how people think and how they express their thoughts. He censors, we talked about what that means, blocks speech in the press, people writing and criticizing him. He controls everything, and people don't have freedom or any say whatsoever. That's more than enough reason for why the people of France might be angry with him, because all their rights, freedoms, and privileges are controlled by him. Document 2 is definitely one I want to take some time to go through. So we have this chart, and this chart compares 3 groups of people. The first estate, the second estate, and the third estate. A refresher, the first estate is the top class in France. These are social classes. The first estate would include the king, the queen, and the very top government officials closest to the king and queen. So this is the top of the top. For the second estate, these are also upper class citizens. These are people who are the nobles and people who are government workers and clergy, church officials as well. So this isn't the top of the top, but it's still the top class. The third estate consists of everybody else, most of whom are going to be low-class peasants in France. So what question 3 asks you is to make a conclusion with the relationship, the correlation between the percentage of population in each estate, so how many people there are, and the percentage of land that each estate owns. So some people said, well, the third estate has more people and it has more land. And you're technically not wrong, but that's not the relationship that we see between the percentage of population and land owned in each estate. You are not looking at the graph and thinking, carefully enough to draw the appropriate conclusion. If we see the black line here represents the percentage of total population, the third estate, that is over 95%. The second and first estate, we are talking about under 5%, like 1% in the first estate and maybe 3 or 2 in the second estate. So 90, let's say 7% of the people in France own only 65% of the land. Meanwhile, 2% in the second estate own 25%, and the 1 or less percent in the first estate own 10% of the land. Right? So technically, yes, the third estate owns more land, but when we look at the relationship and kind of the ratio, if the third estate is 97% of the people, and if everything is equal and fair, technically, shouldn't they also own about 97% of the land? But that's not the case. They only own 65%. That is significantly lower. And if we check out these other two, the percentage of land owned is significantly higher. So when we look at unfair conditions, that's one of them. The fact that the majority of France does not own its fair proportion and ratio of land. It's unequal. It's not fair. Also, if we compare it to this kind of medium gray line, this is percentage of income paid in taxes. Okay, so income paid in taxes means the amount of money they make, what percentage of that gets taxed. And for the third estate, who are the poorest people in France, they are the peasants, 50%, half of their income gets taxed. Meanwhile, the first and second estate, who makes way more money than the third estate does, the first estate is paying no taxes at all, and the second estate is paying maybe 1-2%. That's not fair to make the poorest people pay significantly more in taxes than the richer people. So these are the unfair conditions in France. If you were living in France and you were part of the third estate, you would want revolution too. Number 5 is pretty straightforward. We have conditions here that are miserable, conditions that show people who are ragged and tired and their faces are wrinkled and hardened by labor, and she looks like she's 60 or 70, but she's only 28. Okay, it's a really tough life if you're in the third estate, to the point where you can physically notice that. It's taking a physical toll on how somebody looks. For number 6, I want to go through this because I did not grade it very hard, but a lot of people didn't quite get exactly what should have been the answer. So this question asks, how might France's participation in the American Revolution help spread the ideas of the Enlightenment? A lot of people said, well, the soldiers would talk about it and it would be shared that way. And you're not wrong, that's true. But realize, the French did not need soldiers in America to tell them about Enlightenment ideas. The Enlightenment, in most ways, started there, with people like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Voltaire, Montesquieu, the salons that were being held in France, where people were sharing ideas there. Like Enlightenment ideas already were spreading and existing in France before the American Revolution, and revolutionary soldiers in America did not need to tell the French soldiers about it in order for it to spread. Instead, the real reason why these ideas are spreading is because the American Revolution shows what these ideas can look like in action. It's not just an idea anymore. They are living out these ideas by fighting for a revolution. They're showing exactly what John Locke is talking about, where if a government is oppressive and not doing its job, you can overthrow and replace it. And when they not only just see the Americans doing this, but they see them and help them do it successfully, they can take these ideas in action and seek to do the same with their own oppressive government that's being unfair with taxes and land owned and with voting. So it's not just talking about the ideas, it's being able to witness firsthand these ideas successfully being put into action, and then taking that example and bringing it to France as well. For question 7, we are talking about the Declaration of Independence in America. Question 8, the correct answer is B. This is talking about popular sovereignty. That means that the people have the power. And it talks several times about how the people, the power resides there. All states exist because of the people. This idea that the people should have the power, that's what's being quoted here. And that is a lot of reason why both the American and French revolutions were fought. 9, 10, pretty straightforward. 11, 12, pretty straightforward too. As long as you read the document carefully, you should be able to answer those. Once again, for 12, if you believe that people have all of these rights, and if you believe in John Locke's version of the social contract and not Thomas Hobbes, that's what's going to lead to revolution, because their natural rights that they were born with are not being protected by the government, which gives the people then the right to overthrow and replace that government. That's the specific answer for how these ideas might lead to revolution in France. If you have questions about this worksheet, let me know. There's not going to be a chance for you to redo this worksheet, but you should be correcting it, and make sure you know this information. It'll help you for your quiz tomorrow. So what we're going to talk about next is Robespierre and the Reign of Terror. Here is a picture of Robespierre, and I will post a YouTube biography video of Robespierre that you can watch as well to know more about him. Here are just some of the quotes that he is known for saying. I'll give you a second just to read through them instead of me reading them for you. You guys know how to read. What I want you to think about is, what can we learn about Robespierre from these quotes in terms of the type of person he is, his characteristics, his personality traits. What kind of person is Robespierre when you read these quotes? And I hope what you're going to see is that this guy is nuts. This guy is extremely strict. He is authoritative, and he wants all the control, and anybody who doesn't support him deserves severe punishment for doing so. This is absolutism type of rule personified in these quotes. So the Reign of Terror was a time period after King Louis XVI was beheaded with the guillotine, and this form of revolutionary government starts. The guillotine is known as being the engine of the French Revolution. It fueled it, but not in a good way. It fueled it because if you didn't support revolution, this is what your fate would look like. And they would put this guillotine in front of all these people for all to see, in the same way that they crucified Jesus in public on top of a hill. In the same way that a lot of really harsh dictators choose to punish people in public, is to send a message that if you follow these people's examples, you will suffer this painful, torturous, awful fate. I just got done reading a book from a poet who spent some time in El Salvador during their revolution, earlier in the 20th century. And she talked about how she would see people's limbs cut off in the middle of the road, their intestines all stretched out. She also talked about how military officials in El Salvador and in other places would cut off people's ears and keep them like souvenirs, to the point where one of them had like a whole suitcase full of ears of the people that he had killed. When you want strict authoritative rule, terror is often the way you're going to do that. What we see here is a percentage of the type of people being killed. Remember, the French Revolution was supposed to be fought for the third estate. The middle class, the working class, the peasants. But the idea of it being fought for the third estate is not being lived out in the Reign of Terror, because 31% plus 28% plus 14% plus 11%, if we add all of these up, we're looking at about 3/4 of the people killed by the guillotine being members of the third estate. Meanwhile, the clergy and the nobles, who would be part of the second and first estates, they're only like 15 or so percent. So there is, looks like this would be actually closer to 85, not 75. So what we see here is that the people who this revolution is supposed to be fought for are the people who are getting executed and killed the most. This is one of the key differences between the American and French revolutions, just how much more gruesome and violent and bloody and terrible the French Revolution was compared to the American one. Right, so here's kind of another chart. It says the same thing, that of the people who are executed by the guillotine, and in other ways too, you can be executed by firing squad as well, but mostly the guillotine, 85 or so percent, it's the third estate. It's the poorest, the middle class, the people who this revolution is supposed to be representing. They're the ones getting their heads cut off, literally. So realize what's being fought for here is a couple different things. One is the idea of suffrage, which is the right to vote. So the third estate wants a fairer right to vote. The average people want their voices heard. And under the current system, the right to vote wasn't fair and equal. Part of this idea of the French Revolution is experiencing strong feelings of nationalism. Nationalism is having pride in and devotion to your country. We see this, for example, in the United States of America on the 4th of July. France would experience this during their version of it, known as Bastille Day. A huge part of the French Revolution was the idea that we are proud to be French. But we're proud to be French in a certain way. What it means to be French is a defined term. And it's not something that's going to apply to everybody. Makes it controversial. Nationalism can be a good thing. Oftentimes it's not. Because nationalism can be distorted. Because certain people view their nation in one way compared to others. For example, Nazi Germany, they were nationalistic for Germany in the Nazi sense of it. Obviously, that's a bad thing. And sometimes we can be, maybe not like Nazis, but we can be guilty of using nationalism in bad ways too. We have to be careful with nationalism. Because if we let our country come before and foremost for our God, that's when nationalism becomes idolatry, false worship. It can lead to devastating consequences for nations. So after King Louis XVI gets beheaded, the type of government that takes place, being led by Robespierre, is something called the National Convention. And the group of people in charge of the National Convention was a committee known as the Committee of Public Safety. And that name sounds like a good thing. Public safety is good, but the name is misleading because it really wasn't about public safety. This committee, led by Robespierre, was simply out to protect their own power and their own interests. When you have thousands of people having their heads cut off simply because they don't agree with Robespierre and they don't support the Committee of Public Safety, that is not advocating for public safety. That's doing the opposite. And this is what life was like after King Louis XVI, later in the French Revolution, and before a man named Napoleon eventually comes to power after Robespierre suffers the fate that he executed on so many others, which is getting his head cut off. So here's what I'd like you to do. That's all the conversation we're going to have about the French Revolution. I'm going to post a couple of review materials for you. One of them is going to be a Kahoot. Another one's going to be a Quizlet. What I'd like you to do is prepare for tomorrow's quiz. It will be a quiz grade. It will lock your Chromebook, but you will be able to use notes as long as they are available to you in a different way. So make sure you're organized and prepared for that. Don't forget to answer the bell ringer question. And if you have any questions about Robespierre, about the Reign of Terror, please ask me before tomorrow's quiz, because that will be covered in tomorrow's quiz. Tomorrow's quiz will talk about the American Revolution, talk about the causes of the French Revolution. It will talk about yesterday's video, the events of the French Revolution, and then today with Robespierre and the Reign of Terror. Otherwise, that's all the work you have. I apologize for some of these longer videos. I'm trying to make sure we get everything covered before the school year ends, and that's why we're getting a little bit more notes than usual. So again, reach out with questions, and I'll talk to you more tomorrow.